Human Nature, a journey in search of a peaceful and prosperous society with human nature as a guide. Led by your host, Adam Heyman.
That was so energetic, Tyrone. Thank you so much. We have a great episode today, folks, because Tyrone has a little issue going on and a video to play that somehow manages to link people freezing in the Albertan winter with the concept of sovereignty and the reason for my Moses quote right there next to my name. So why don't you tell us what you've got for us, Tyrone?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I saw this video online a while back and sent it to you. Wanted to get your thoughts on it as a general topic overall. I thought it would be a good sort of launching point for a general conversation on the topic of sovereignty, secession, national divorce, whatever you want to call it, things that are sort of cropping up in the mainstream political discussion these days. So there's this article from CBC, the Canadian Broadcast Corporation. So this is obviously, as you mentioned, happening in Alberta. The headline of the article says Alberta invokes Sovereignty Act over federal clean electricity regulations. The subtitle is Premier Danielle Smith believes net zero electricity grid by 2035 is risky and costly. And just the first couple paragraphs of the article to give it some context, and then we'll play this little video clip. The article says, Alberta's United Conservative government has invoked its controversial Sovereignty Act for the first time by introducing a resolution to push back against the federal government's proposed clean electricity regulations. The resolution, tabled in the Alberta legislature Monday, instructs governments and provincial entities such as the Alberta Electric System Operator and the Alberta Utilities Commission to ignore the regulations when they come into force, quote, to the extent legally permissible, unquote. So what's going on here? There's a lot of these environmental Green New Deal type initiatives coming that are going to shut down traditional power plants. And hey, last I checked, Alberta can be a pretty cold place in the winter, and maybe this might pose some issues coming forward. So here's what they have. It's weird when you read other countries like titles, like we would call our state leaders governors, right, and cities mayors. So Danielle Smith is the premier.
I gotta say, Canada's winning on that one. Premier is way cooler than governor.
It just sounds so. I don't know. It sounds so ominous for some reason to me. But anyway,
would you rather be a premier?
For sure,
a premier.
For sure. All right. So here's the video clip of Premier Danielle Smith giving a news briefing about this.
Persists in trying to regulate and remake Alberta's electrical system from generation to transmission to distribution, which will make life more expensive for families and put the reliability of our grid at risk. And they're pushing ahead with their plan, even though Section 92A of the Constitution of Canada is clear that legislating and regulating the development of electricity falls within the jurisdiction of the provinces. Alberta's government is committed to protecting Albertans from federal overreach. That is why this afternoon I intend to table a resolution in the chamber under the Alberta Sovereignty within a United Canada Act. We developed this legislation to shield the province from federal intrusions, and we're using it now because the consequences of this particular overreach would be so severe. Alberta will bear the largest share of the expenses required to meet these absurd targets, and consumers and businesses will see their bills soar. If the federal government has its way, many people will be left without electricity that they can pay for on a power grid that will fall short or even fail in a typical Alberta winter or summer. We refuse to go along with this plan. I mean, if they come through with the clean electricity regs, they will be mandating that we have to have essentially an emissions-free power grid by 2035. That means no one will build natural gas. We don't have a regulatory framework to build nuclear. No one will build nuclear. We don't have the resources to build hydro. No one will build hydro. So if we do not act, we will end up with instability in our grid, We will either not be able to grow as a province, or we will end up with brownouts and blackouts. That's the pathway that the federal government is giving us. And I've just said, no, we are not doing that.
So that kind of gives you the gist of it. It's a longer interview. You can search it out for yourself. But I thought it was interesting that I can't remember so much what you and I might term nullification. We certainly have seen it happen in the United States, with different states legalizing things like marijuana against the laws of the federal government. And I think we're just going to see more and more of it. So I thought this would be a good, just sort of talking point. Again, what we try to do in this show is take real world things that are happening in the real world, the political landscape or cultural landscape, and tie them back to a philosophical principle. So the principle here we're going to tie this to ultimately is just the idea of sovereignty itself, and what does that mean? And
well, that was a fascinating video, and it does bring up a whole bunch of issues that we'll get into. But the first one is, what do you think? Was that 2 midget women, or was that 1 giant man? That was really distracting. That guy was huge.
Yeah, they need some sort of PR or advertising professional. It's like, okay, yeah, put her up on a podium or something, or a raised stage. You're right. I didn't notice that. You're right.
But anyway, yeah, I'm a big fan of what this lady is doing. Apparently, I mean, I think these people, these legislatures in various countries are just hallucinating about what is possible. Apparently, this clean electricity bill mandates an emissions-free power grid by 2035.
Crazy.
They are. I mean, she talks about trying to have Alberta grow, as of course every economy needs to at this stage in our development. But it's worse than growth. These people are going to freeze. Alberta is cold. And so I'm very happy for her standing up in the way that she's doing. In fact, she's claiming that the Canadian Constitution mandates that these sorts of decisions be made at the provincial level rather than the federal level. So I hope she has firm ground to stand on. But whether she does or not, as you just elucidated, there's an enormous wave of nullification moments like these, where people who are feeling oppressed by their central government are just saying, you know what? You're wrong here, and to hell with you. And in the States, on the left side of issues, one of the biggest ones is marijuana. It is still a criminal, an illegal substance, but in several states in our union, that just doesn't matter. The states are saying, I do not care. I interpose myself between our citizens and you, the federal regulators, and we're just going to do what we want. And you're getting things on the Second Amendment grounds, legal tender grounds, and I'm very happy about it. We're also getting all across the globe secessionist movements, which is maybe nothing new in human history, but at a time in our civilization where nation states seem to be, the currency of the globe, I think it's very interesting that some people are striking back against that and wanting to control their own polity in a more decentralized way. Like maybe we went too far with this massive centralization that we've done over the last couple hundred years, and I'm all for it. We were talking before we hit record here, Tyrone, and I was just looking up on Wikipedia, and if you just put into it, what is the phrase?
Separatism.
Yeah, separatism. We'll pull it up for you. There's a list all across the globe, of several dozen peoples that want to be freed from their central government. We just had Brexit, where Britain wanted out of the European Union. We just had referendums in Scotland where they wanted away from Britain. I think every year Texas wants to secede from the United States. And for 4 random years, I don't know why it would be, but from 2016 to 2020, the great state of California, for some reason, wanted to break apart from the United States too. I don't know what that would have had anything to do with. And then you've got, the Basques in France and Spain, the Catalan people in Spain, all over Europe and all over Africa and all over Asia. You've got people that want to not be ruled by people they consider to be oppressors. And I don't know what you think, Tyrone, but I find that to be a good thing.
Yeah, when you say what you will about Wikipedia, whatever. We all use it, and that's fine. But yeah, here's the site you listed just under the heading of separatism, and I was shocked when you shared this with me. There's just whole categories. There's movements in every part of the world right now. So I mean, it's happening everywhere. There's different groups, and I mean, I suppose in a way that this has always been happening throughout human history. Obviously, wars essentially are not sometimes in a way a secessionist movement. It's definitely two groups not getting along. If you would just want to define secessionism as, or separatism, I mean to say separatism as just like we want to be apart. We don't want to be together, and we don't want to cooperate with each other. We don't want to live peacefully with each other, and that's just could be a literal definition of war. It's just anti-separatism or pro-separatism, I guess. But so yes, in a way, this has happened throughout history. It continues to happen. And maybe every generation says this, like it's worse now than it ever was before, or things are changing so much more quickly. But I don't know. I think objectively that's true. Brexit, in recent history, I mean, I know that was a narrow margin, but the fact that something like that could even happen is crazy. Even if it gets overturned and they end up just going back to the European Union, the fact that states in the United States are just saying no to federal regulation. I mean, marijuana is a great example, but so was COVID during the time. Some governors just said we're not going along with the federal mandates or guidelines. Things that are happening in Texas. There's now what is it called? Texit, something like that movement. And then the governor down there, Governor Abbott, saying, hey, we're going to build our own walls, no matter what you say. So there's always been, and even in a way, peaceful protests, things like Gandhi had led or whatever, may not technically have been classified as a separatist movement, but it's basically saying we're not going to go along with your rules and way of saying things anymore. But when you shared the Wikipedia page, I was amazed at just how many are going on in the world. And in a way, that's just my own ignorance. It's the terrible state of the American news media. Like Americans are so ignorant about what's happening in the rest of the world. It's just insane. I don't know.
Well, while we applaud all these separatist movements, I suppose we ought to give the devil its due and talk a little bit about why there was a push for centralization in the first place. And you get that Hobbesian sort of argument that people need to group together for security and cultural continuity, and without doing so, you get chaos, you get civil war, you find yourself too small a unit militarily to protect yourself from encroachment and war. So you could certainly see why we've always been groupish people. Obviously, as a species, we're not atomistic, and you can certainly see why you might be tempted to create something like a state for self-protection. You do have a little bit of a problem in the fact that hardly ever in actual history is that the way states are formed. It's usually just one people conquering another. But throwing that aside, there's an argument to be made that you get some good from centralization. And the recent cause to break up just means like maybe we've gone too far. But as you centralize political power, you come up with a problem, or at least something that needs to be dealt with, which is, well, then who gets to make the decisions for these people? You know, in super olden days, it was who gets to be the chief, right? In a sort of a might makes right sort of paradigm, you know, where we're barely a little bit more than orangutans. And then as we got more fanciful notions of why one person or group of people should be leaders, it evolved into different things, like we had the divine right of kings for a long time, and in the East, the Chinese had a mandate of heaven, or however they phrased it, and you get more, and then you get lineages based on these sorts of theories. And so usually when we think of the concept of sovereignty, it's in relationship to a sovereign who holds dominion over a particular geographical piece of land and a particular group of people, whether they like it or not. So, even giving the devil his due, you can certainly see why some people who are just born into that situation might bristle at that, especially when you consider just how arbitrary it is. I mean, go back to your Wikipedia there and put in Kurdistan into it, and you'll find this interesting history of these people, the Kurds, who were conquered by the Ottoman Empire long ago and have been ruled over by all sorts of different people. Then after World War I, they split their, not country exactly, but the region of their people into parts of Turkey and Syria and Iran and Iraq. And they've been dealing with feeling like they are a conquered and oppressed people by various different regimes ever since. And you can certainly understand, and the same with the Catalans in Spain. And you can certainly see why people feel that the proper political divisions on the map are not there yet. So maybe we shouldn't etch in stone exactly where all the boundaries are, because some people feel like they're being a little bit put upon, and I don't blame them.
Yeah, I like to do these thought experiments. So I think what you said was right, and this was actually, so since you just did the interview with Stephan Kinsella, this was another point, another light bulb moment for me that I learned from him, was that the type of sort of libertarian anarchist world that we envision in our minds is sort of where we want society to eventually go. I recall Stephan Kinsella kind of making the point that requires a level of technology to achieve before it can be done. And I remember, again, on that point, Leonard Peikoff, the intellectual heir of Ayn Rand, made a comment. Now, granted, I have a lot of problems with Leonard Peikoff, don't get me wrong. But I remember him saying one time that the objectivist moral philosophy is not possible pre-industrial society. And so that gets me thinking to a thought experiment going back 150,000, 200,000 years ago, whenever you want to say the first humans came about. There's no way a libertarian sort of society would have been possible, right? It was just fight for survival. And so you can imagine back then, evolutionarily speaking, it was advantageous to have some people predisposed to be bullies and dictators and quote unquote the chiefs, to take the lead and just force, impose their will upon the group in order for survival. So if you imagine that sort of natural evolution of how human societies must have come about, I'm not saying it did. I don't have a time machine. There's no records really to go back. But if you just think logically, this must have how it had been worked, that a group would have formed a leader, turned into a chief, a tribal leader, who then turned into a king, who then, as societies grew, turned into the president or prime minister or whatever. So we're still sort of under this ancient, caveman system that has lasted throughout all these years. And the Industrial Revolution just happened a couple hundred years ago. So we're so early in the evolution of our society. And I think Kinsella put it, as I recall what he had said, that in order to get to that fully free, individually autonomous, anarcho-libertarian society, it's going to require a more advanced level of technology than we have today. And when David Friedman wrote his book Machinery of Freedom, he tells the story when he showed it to his father, Milton Friedman. Milton told David, I think there's a chance that this could work, but probably not. And David said, I think that there's a chance it might not work, but probably would. But no one's 100% convinced that the pure anarcho-capitalist society, even the forethought leaders of it, like Friedman, are convinced we're ready for it as a species. So I think we're transitioning. I think and I think we're getting to close to that technological point where we can become more self-sufficient and need less protection from states and governments. Do you agree with any of what I just sort of said? What are your thoughts on that?
I can certainly see why you might think that, and a lot of the things that we would need for proper anarcho-capitalism, a certain amount of wealth, capital, and most especially the means to communicate. Obviously, it would have been harder back before these things were invented. I definitely think we have enough now. But the concept of individual rights and institutional rights, and the ebb and flow between centralization and decentralization, it hasn't moved in one long journey. It's gone in fits and starts. I mean, like, even as chieftains were, progressing into kings, the kingdoms didn't ossify into nation states, and the king himself didn't aggregate total power unto himself until rather late in the game. I mean, historically, there were always rights held by other members of the aristocracy. The church had certain rights. Guilds had certain rights. Cities, city-states, even within an ostensible kingdom had certain rights and traditions. The king was held in check by custom, and at the end of the day, maybe it's the mob with torches and pitchforks that is the final protector of these customs, but the customs nevertheless existed. And I think it's something that's changed relatively recently in the last, I don't know, 100 years, just say, roughly, that we've really created, again, ossified structures of political power, where even though our constitutions, both here and in Canada, say we have federalism and different states and different provinces that have, as recorded in law, their own specific regions of sovereignty that are supposed to be pretty big. We've abandoned that idea in favor of one set of laws only for the entire 350 million people in the United States, and however many they have in Canada. What, 20, 30? I don't know. It's pretty small.
Yeah. So I think what you're getting at, and we kind of touched on this on an earlier episode, is that these aren't necessarily ideologically driven movements.
Right.
It may
They're not.
just be a matter of math. That once a society's population gets to a certain size, there's just too many people with too many different ideas and viewpoints to all get along. And so there may be, I won't call it an ideal number, but there may be a more just built into our nature, a certain size limit to how big we can make a government. So if I'm a small Amish community of only 250 people, then the one size fits all rules work because it's smaller, it's more manageable. We can all agree. But as it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, even the Amish split off. They sort of have a hard limit of around that 250 people mark. As far as I understand, once they get bigger than that, they'll split and they'll form another community. So I think maybe that's just what we're seeing. America is over 300 million people. It's just too many people for everybody to get along, and we're naturally, as human beings, just we need groups, we need societies, but we can't be too big before a conflict happens.
couple of things. We definitely need societies, obviously. Even as an anarchist, I'm not denying that.
Right.
And you definitely hit on one of the variables that's germane, just size, population size. Obviously, the size of the most nation states, and especially our own, is way too big. But I think there are other factors too. There's an episode of the Tom Woods Show recently where he was interviewing a world traveler who wrote a book, and he talked about what it is that makes up, quote unquote, a people. And so I think
Okay.
there's an aspect of culture, shared values, language, obviously. So anytime one central state is trying to govern by force people that have size as a matter, as you said, but also just cultural and linguistic dissimilarities, that's going to cause some friction and make people want to break away. And the topic of the show is sovereignty, and we're talking about Alberta, bucking against the sovereign or asserting its own sovereignty versus the Canadian central government, and all these secession movements and efforts to nullify various edicts. And as I was talking with Stefan Kinsella, the principle of libertarianism and anarcho-capitalism is based on the sovereignty, the only sovereignty that's actually true, the sovereignty of yourself. You definitely own your own person. You own your own body. It's the first thing you own. It's the most important thing you own. You definitely are sovereign over yourself. And anything bigger than that that's imposed by force is a bit of a problem and leads to inevitable breakup. It's a system that's not stable. So as you were saying before, we need obviously massive society. We are groupish as a species, and we need to get together to grow things, to build things, to have fun, to engage in common legislature by which we have rules. We can trade amongst one another, and we need protection. Obviously, we need to group together for that. But it needs to be based on the voluntary interaction of sovereign individuals, because the locus of sovereignty, if it's going to be applicable to our human nature, needs to be located in the individual. And then every social contract that exists for groupings of people needs to be an actually signed on a dotted line contract, not this mythological one that we just assume we signed in the womb before we were even ejected into this world, and we need to like flee to another planet at this point to get away from it or something. So sovereignty is individual, and our groups that are formed that make us thrive as a human society need to be voluntary, and that's key. And I think all these secession efforts, I don't think they have this in their brain, this philosophical concept. No. But I think instinctively that's what they're reacting to. They want to get closer to their smaller political decentralized units that are much closer to my libertarian ideal and away from these ossified states that the nation state is going to be a blot in human history, I think, in 1,000 years. Everybody like, how could we ever have thought this was a good idea?
Yeah. So I think that's exactly right. I think this is more instinctual, more reactionary, but I think then that creates an opportunity for people like you and me who have the philosophical arguments to justify those instinctual feelings and connect that to a philosophical argument. I think it's an opportunity for us to spread that message, because if people are feeling this angst, feeling this something is wrong, they're going to be looking for why that is. They're going to be looking for, am I right about feeling this way? And if so, how to make sense of it. And so that's when we can come in, present some arguments, and hopefully, convert some people to our side if you give them, because they're going to be looking for an answer from somebody. And the first person that comes along, like we had talked about in a previous episode with the fire hose and the burning house, they're just going to go with them. So the first person that,
and they also need a justification. I mean, you're
That's
going to get a lot further in your, let my people go declaration if you have something more solid to stand on. Except, screw you, guy.
Right.
Get off my lawn. I mean, you're going to go further in these secession efforts and nullification efforts if you have a strong argument as to why your position isn't just your preference, it's right in some sense, pointing to some set of values. And so, yeah, I hope these ideas catch on. I think the impetus, the emotional impetus, the instinctive impetus is catching on. And anything we can do to fill the sails of that movement and push it along, I say yay.
Yeah, the thing I like to say to, I guess, conservatives, if you want to call them that, or people on the right or whatever, the people that give lip service to limited government, I'll say, when all you talk about limited government, all you're talking about is spending. So you're talking about the size of the budget, limited government. I actually like to kind of needle them a little bit, or try to make the extra point that limited government shouldn't just mean the size of the budget, but the size of the geography. So when you look at it that way, and I don't think most people have ever thought about limited government not just being limited by money, but limited by actual physical geography size. The smaller government means smaller territory. So for me, that's what I mean by limited government.
That's really interesting. I mean, usually in our circles, the two dimensions that are brought up for limited government is the size, which you're interpreting as the size of the budget, and the scope, which refers to how much of civil life does the government actually have authority over. The founders wanted that very small. Joe Biden wants it infinite. But you make a great point. We don't often think about the size issue being purely territorial or numerical, because as we mentioned earlier, this is too big. I don't know what the proper size is, even if you're a minarchist and not an anarchist like me, but whatever the proper size for minarchy, this is way too big.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I learned that lesson from the Amish. I mean, I think the Amish have a lot to teach us, even though they've rejected sort of the technological advancements that we like. But they literally, when they get to too large of a size, they split, because their insight is human beings can only get along with so many people at one time. In a way,
I've heard theorists say that evolutionarily speaking, the number's about 150.
That we can like mentally care for, have some emotional connection to, something like that, right?
So and I think as our technology increases, also you don't need to care for every member of your group the exact same much. The people in your family you're going to care for a little bit more than the people who live right next door, than the people who live at the far ends of the village, whatever it is. And I think with modern communication, we can extend way beyond that 150 thing, especially if it's voluntary.
But it's so much easier to have direct control over your life, your government, your community when it's smaller.
Yeah.
I mean, if you live in a town of 100 people and the mayor's your neighbor that you grew up with, and you both, play softball together or whatever, you have a lot more direct influence and connection to your community, to your government, versus a country of 300 million people that have 435 representatives in Congress. What? You have no influence.
It's also
so you lose all connection.
It's also interesting when you're talking about the formation of an anarchist society. I think you're right. If the force equation was taken off, or if all interactions had to be voluntary, I think the social formations, like think of an HOA as a clumsy placeholder. I think those would be small, like a village. But we don't have to give up on having global commerce, because we can also voluntarily enter into a purchasing set of rules, like Visa might govern, or Amex, or eBay. We can still have all of the powerful things that you get from specialization, division of labor, global trade, and you don't have to inject force into that. You just have to have rules that everybody agrees on, and you do that, and it doesn't really matter what your culture is. We can a Muslim can pick up a Jew in a cab, you know, and nope, there doesn't have to be any problem there. We
Right.
all agree on one set of rules for this transaction and this
Right.
set of property. And when you go home, you have different sets of rules. One side
Exactly.
follows Sharia and the other follows the Talmud or whatever.
Hmm.
We've made a mistake in ossifying every single aspect of our relations by force to everybody in one geographical unit. And if the quicker we learn that that was a dead end and reverse course, the better off we'll be.
Yeah, I always say to people, I think if we can just somehow make it as a species another 20 years, I think for 200,000 years we basically lived at Stone Age caveman levels. Industrial Revolution comes along, and look how fast technology has just gone. I mean, I
In
think
human prosperity, the hockey
yeah,
stick of human prosperity is amazing. No matter how you measure it, you know, caloric intake, the ability to do work, you know, whatever it is, whatever measure of human progress, even in the poorest areas of this planet, it's just
so
shot
what
up like a
yeah.
rocket.
So once we get to the technological point where I'll have my own little personal nuclear reactor in my house to power
Right.
all my power needs, I'll have a robot in my house to perform surgery if I need it. I'll have the thing from Star Trek where if I want a meal, I just push a button and I get a steak dinner. I will have my own technological autonomy. I won't need the government for anything. I won't need all these other things that 200,000 years ago we needed brute force to protect us just to survive. So I think if we can just avoid blowing ourselves to pieces or killing ourselves with some virus or something, 20 years, man, I'm just seeing all the stuff that's being worked on right now. I think we're close to another just breakout moment.
I think you're
So
right.
I think we're
I think
closer
you're
than
right,
ever, but we got
Tyrone.
to get there. Like
I'm
we're
op-
on the edge,
I'm
I think.
optimistic as well. I think we're almost at the point, assuming we don't blow ourselves up or disintegrate from identity politics and racial animus and sexual animus, which is insane.
Yeah.
But as we wrap up here,
Yeah.
I just want to say two things to you about your hypothetical future. The Star Trek replicator is magic, so don't put all your eggs in that basket. And B, I can't help but noticing that you've enslaved an artificial intelligence, and we got to have a conversation about that. That thing's sentient. Your robo surgeon. What are you doing, man?
The robo surgeon, it's sentient? Okay. All right. Well,
Obviously.
that is a deep philosophical conversation for another day, Adam. Well, once again, thanks for the great conversation. It's definitely a topic that is going to be picking up steam here, especially in 2024. I think we'll have a lot more to say about that. Any final words for our listeners?
Just a thank you to you, Tyrone, and to all our listeners/viewers for sticking with us. We love talking to you, and I hope you enjoyed the show.
Awesome. Well, remember, everybody, like, subscribe, all that jazz, blah, blah, blah. All right. Thanks, Adam. We'll talk to you later.